All right, good morning and welcome to our Zoom with the HR MacMillan Space Centre, our middle of the summer Zoom to connect and see what's happening in the night sky above our heads. So we have Trish and Rachel here. You guys can take it away.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Haley. Hey, Rachel.
Yeah.
How's your summer going so far?
It's pretty good. And there's lots of things in the night sky right now, so I'm really excited about going out and stargazing.
I have been too, Rachel. I have to say, I got away from the city for a little bit at the beginning of July, and man, there are lots of stars up there. So we've got a lot to talk about today, so take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, but I just want to say that I've missed all of you, so I'm really happy to see your faces again. So here we are, and it should be up in just a few seconds. Here, all right. So what are we talking about today? Well, you might have heard it in the news. Everyone's been talking about this once-in-a-lifetime comet called Comet Neowise, and that's in our skies right now. So before we talk about why everyone's super excited about it, let's remind ourselves what a comet is. So comets are these cosmic snowballs of frozen gases, rock, and dust that go around our sun. Now, when they're frozen, they're around the size of a small town. And when a comet's orbit brings it closer to the sun, it actually heats up the comet and it spews out gas and dust into a giant, glowing, feathery trail larger than most planets. Now, the dust and gases from a tail stretches away from the sun for many millions of miles. Now, there are likely billions of comets orbiting our sun, going around our sun, in the Kuiper Belt and the even more distant cloud. Now, the current number of known comets is actually 3,653, so quite a few comets out there. So why is everyone excited about this particular one if there's thousands out there? Well, first of all, it's super bright. It's so bright, in fact, you can see it with just your naked eye alone. And even though it's getting a little bit dimmer now, it'll continue to dim as time goes on, but you can still see it with your naked eye. Now, it's also a once-in-a-lifetime thing because the next time the comet comes around, that'll be in over 6,000, almost 7,000 years. So a really long time until the comet comes back. And the last time we saw a comet was way back in 1997. It was a comet called Hale-Bopp. So it really is a once-in-a-lifetime thing unless you can wait thousands of years. Now, if you use special equipment, things like a really good pair of binoculars, a telescope, or even a camera, you'll be able to see the comet's two tails. There's one that's more white and a little bit bigger, and a smaller blue one to the side. Now, a wonder I've always had is, how do astronomers name comets? When I see one, can I just call it Bob or Alice? Well, it turns out they actually have a system to name these cosmic snowballs. So before astronomers came up with a way to name comets, they used to name it by the year that they found it. So things like the Comet of 1702, for example. And if it was really, really bright, then they would name it a great comet, like the Great Comet of 1680. And if more than one great comet appeared in a year, then they would add the month. So they would say something like the Great January Comet of 1910. But then because people kept seeing so many comets, they decided to start naming the comets after the person who discovered it, whether they saw it with their own eyes or they used math to discover it. You might have heard of Halley's Comet, which is named after astronomer Edmund Halley, and he was the one who found that comet. But now we started to name comets a little bit differently because, like I said, we found thousands. So now we name them with a letter and a number, which is the year that we found it. So if a comet has the letter P, then that means that it goes around the sun and it takes less than 200 years to go around the sun once. For example, Comet Swift-Tuttle is the comet that gives rise to the Perseid meteor shower later on in August. And the comet that gives rise to it is also called Comet 109P. And then if it has a C, then it's the opposite of a comet named with a P. If it has an X, then astronomers don't know the path that the comet's going to travel very well. And so we can't predict where it'll end up or where we can find it. If it has a D in the name, then the comet has disappeared, broken up, or been lost. And if it has an A, that means that astronomers made a mistake and it's actually an asteroid instead of a comet. And if it has an I, then that means that it's coming from interstellar space, so really, really, really far out away, and it actually doesn't orbit our sun, but it's just visiting us and flying by. Alrighty, so let's say you wanted to go out and look at the comet tonight, and hopefully the skies are clear. It was a little cloudy when I came in this morning, but hopefully they'll clear up by tonight. You might have to stay up a little bit late because the best time to view the comet is just after sunset around 10 p.m. And you'll want to look in the northwest direction, and maybe an adult can help you figure out which direction that is. And then you want to look towards the Big Dipper. So remember, the Big Dipper looks like a gigantic soup ladle in the sky, and the comet will be just underneath that cup of the Big Dipper. And you'll also want to do something called averted vision, which means that you don't look directly at the comet, but you look a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, because your eyes are more sensitive to dim things at the edges of your vision rather than directly at the center. And also remember that the comet is moving, so it won't be in the same location every night. It actually started off in a constellation called Auriga, then it moved into the constellation Lynx, and now it's moving towards the Big Dipper. And then later in the month, it'll start to move away from the Big Dipper and get dimmer. So you want to go out as soon as you can, as soon as the skies are clear and dark. Now, if you can't go tonight, I can show you how to find the comet on other nights. I use a really nifty website, and I'll pull it up here. Let's see if I can bring it on here. Here we go. So I go to time and date, and I click Find Comet Neowise, and then I click the best time to find it. And you can see we're looking in the northwest direction. If I go up a little bit, you see the Big Dipper, and here's the cup of the Big Dipper, and then right below is the comet. So this is a really handy website. Not only can we look at comets, we can also look at planets. For example, Jupiter and Saturn are up right now, and we look at the best time. It's around 1 a.m., and we want to look towards the south. And then you can also find Mars as well, but you might have to stay up really late or get up really early, because around 5 a.m. is the best time to see Mars. But again, we're looking in the south direction. And so if you can't see the comet, then you might as well go out and look for these beautiful planets as well. Alrighty. And so the next time we chat, we'll learn about a different comet, and that's Comet Swift-Tuttle. And that gives us the Perseid meteor shower in the middle of August. And what's really cool is here is a photograph taken from the International Space Station of a Perseid meteor that came from this comet. And I think that's really cool to be able to see these meteors from the ISS. Now, Trish, I wonder what your wonders are. Could you share with us a wonder that you have about space?
Well, that's absolutely, Rachel. So here's my first question about the comet that we're talking about. You said that the comet is like a snowball, but a dirty snowball that you mix up that has maybe some rocks and some pebbles in it, and it's frozen and it's flying through the air. And what we see in the tail, what is that part?
A lot of gas and dust, and so that the reason why we have that long white tail, that long feathery white tail, is because the sun is heating up the comet. So there's some times where the comet is too far away from the sun and it won't have a tail because the sun's too far to heat up this dirty snowball. But when it gets closer, the sun can heat it up a little bit more, and then we start to see that long white tail.
So Rachel, when I make a snowball, just like everybody, let's see. Can I get a thumbs up from everybody if you've ever made a snowball before? Yeah, thumbs up. Good, good. Lacey and Declan, you guys have. Nice. Lincoln, perfect. Natalia and Sasha, good. There's some snowballs. Awesome. All right, guys. Adrian, I can see you've made a snowball. So when I make a snowball, Rachel, I gather as much snow as I can, and then I usually can lift it to throw it. And then sometimes I've made a snowman or a snow person, and I've rolled really big snowballs and then lifted them on top. Now, how big are we talking, these comet snowballs? How big are they? Could I throw them? Could I lift them?
So this comet in particular is quite massive, and most comets are quite massive. So you could probably never make a comet that big here or make a snowball that big here on Earth, because the comet that I'm talking about, Comet Neowise, the one that everyone's really excited about, is actually 5 kilometers across. I could barely run 5 kilometers in half an hour, just straight running. So it's a really, really massive comet. Yeah.
So we would have to get on our bikes, put on our helmets, jump onto the comet, and then ride and ride and ride and ride to get all across the snowball if we were able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is a really big snowball. And the difference between seeing it in the nighttime sky and seeing a shooting star, which many of our friends out there have seen, what is the difference between those?
Well, that's a good question, because they kind of look a little bit similar. When you see a shooting star, you see kind of a trail going behind this meteor, but really they're kind of really closely linked. And I talked a little bit about that when we were talking about the Perseids and the comet that gives the stuff for the Perseids to happen. So with that, the comet leaves behind almost like a trail, almost like a breadcrumb trail as it's going around our sun. And then our Earth ends up going through all those crumbs, all that stuff. And that stuff ends up interacting with our atmosphere. And so that's when you start to get these streaks of stuff streaking across our nighttime sky and what we normally would call shooting stars.
That's really cool information, Rachel. And that's important to remember that comets, they don't ever come into our atmosphere, do they? We just see them further out in space.
No, and that's probably a good thing because they're so big.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want one of those to land in your front yard. Awesome. Good information. Now, before we get to the question and answers, I just wanted to share something with my friends. So let me see if you can see me. Perfect. So what I wanted to share was I've been outside looking up at the nighttime sky, and I've seen so many stars, and I know there's lots of constellations up there, but one of my favorite things is to play connect the dots. So I connect the dots up in the nighttime sky, and then I try to come up with a story about them, my own constellation. So I have a question and a wonder. Would any of you this summer like to come up with your own constellation stories? Maybe that's something you can do with your parents. You can jot down on a piece of paper a number of stars, and then you can go out and look in the nighttime sky and see if you can see those stars up in this nighttime sky. We have lots of constellations. We have the Big Bear, the Big Dipper. We have Cassiopeia. Rachel, what are some of your favorite constellations?
I really like Cassiopeia and Andromeda. I feel like they go really well together. And it's really easy to spot Cassiopeia because it looks like a big W or a big M in the sky depending on when you go out. And I love the story behind it as well, that Cassiopeia was the queen of Ethiopia, Andromeda was her daughter, a princess, and they lived together up in the nighttime sky.
Perfect. So you can think of lots of stories in the nighttime sky that you can make up. So like Sasha and Natalia, you could have dragons in the nighttime sky. You can have comets going through. You can make up all kinds of great stories. So my friends, we're going to meet again in August. How about you think of some stories and make up your own constellation stories in the nighttime sky, and we talk about that a bit in August, all right? So you have a good month to think of some connect the dots stories that you want to come up with. Hey, Haley, is it a good time to start some questions and wonders, some things that our friends might have seen in the nighttime sky in the last little while?
Absolutely. So boys and girls, if you have a question for Trish or Rachel, you can put up your hand to ask the question, or if your screen is off, you can type it into the chat box and I can ask it for you. So I already see lots of hands, so I will go through and I'll write down the names that I see too, so you don't have to keep your hands up the whole time. So I will start with Lincoln. What is your question?
My question is, doesn't the meteor, what's it again?
Comet?
What's it called again?
A comet.
The comet usually goes around, I think, 50 years? Every 50 years?
That's a good question. So different comets have different periods where they come back. So with this one that everyone's really excited about, it's going to take almost 7,000 years for it to come back and for us to see it again. But there's other comets out there, like Comet Halley takes around 80 years. So it's one of the few comets that actually you can see twice in your lifetime if you're born at the right time.
So that's a good question, actually, Rachel, and one I have for you. Do comets get bigger as the further away from the sun that they get? So if I make a snowman and I have it on my yard, as the temperature warms up, my snowman starts to melt, and then his hat falls off and his arms fall onto the grass. Does our comet start to melt when it gets closer to the sun, or start to get bigger as it gets further away from the sun?
That's a good question. So it does get a little bit smaller because the stuff that's in the tail actually comes from the comet itself. The sun heats it up, and then all the gas and dust ends up trailing behind the comet. So that's what we see in the tail. But when it goes back around and leaves the sun, it's further away from the sun, it's not heated up anymore. So it's not losing stuff to this tail anymore when it's further away from the sun.
Cool. It's kind of like putting a snowman in the freezer and taking it out later.
Exactly, yeah.
Good question, Lincoln.
Oh, hey, Haley, I think you're muted, yeah.
It just popped up to tell me I was. I think Amanda has a question. Amanda, what is your question, kiddo? Can you tell us your question?
Why become an astronaut?
How do you become an astronaut? I think that was the question.
Can you ask your question again?
Say it louder, Amanda.
How do I become an astronaut?
Oh, good question, Amanda. Rachel has some good answers for that.
Sure. So pretty much anyone can become an astronaut, but you have to go through a lot of schooling. They like it when you have flight training. So you're able to fly airplanes first, and then they'll put you in a spacecraft and fly a spacecraft then, because the same skills that you use for flying a plane are also relevant to when you're flying a giant spacecraft to somewhere like the moon.
That's really true. And one of the other things that they look for in astronauts, Amanda, is good teamwork, which means you get along really well with your brothers and sisters and your friends, and you can play together, you can give instructions and work really well with other people. So,
especially if you're stuck in a tiny room with a bunch of other people for a long time.
Yep.
Great question. I wonder how many of you kids one day may grow up to aspire to be an astronaut. It's neat looking at you guys all young, knowing that you could be anything you want. So I wonder how many of you put up your hand if you think maybe one day you may want to be an astronaut. A few of you, I see some hands. I see some heads shaking too. Not so much, David? No?
Well, one of the best things about training to be an astronaut is you can kind of do it now, Haley, because you can just ask lots of wonders, have a really inquisitive mind, and ask lots of questions. That's good training to become a future astronaut.
That's true. And actually asking lots of wonders and wondering lots of things is actually great training to be pretty much anything, because it's good to be inquisitive and ask questions, hey?
Yeah.
So I see Natalia and Sasha, and you guys have your hands up. I see David's hand up and I see Anastasia's hand up. So I've written your guys' names down so you don't have to hold your hands up, but I will get to you. So we're going to start with Natalia and Sasha and cousins there. So what's your question, guys?
How can what's it called again?
Comet.
Can a comet be longer than 5
kilometers?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that this comet is kind of on the small to medium range of comets out there, but you can have much, much larger snowballs out there. It just depends on how much stuff is on your comet. So this one is 5 kilometers across, which seems really big, but because it's so large, we're able to see it in our nighttime sky. So the bigger the comet, the easier it is for us to see it.
Awesome. Does anyone else, Natalia, have a question on your couch there?
How does the meteor move? No, it's the comet. How does the comet move?
So you can imagine it's almost like a game of tug of war. The sun is the thing that the comet is going around. And if you imagine, the sun almost has a little rope attached to the comet, and it's pulling it a little bit as it goes around around the sun. So it's really our sun that actually brings the comet around, kind of like the sun is the thing that our Earth goes around.
So if I understand you right, Rachel, it's kind of like an invisible lasso that's kind of grabbing onto our comet and pulling it around. That's really
swinging
cool.
it around. Exactly, yeah.
Natalia and Sasha, I think there's one more question there.
2 more questions.
Okay, go for it.
Excuse me, how do we go to space?
Oh, good question, my friend. We've got some really cool rockets that blast off from the Earth and go to space. They have lots of rocket fuel in them. And right now it takes about 8 minutes of our rocket ship to get into space. So a pretty short ride to get to space. But if we were going to go to things like the moon, it would be a lot longer of a rocket trip. Maybe like 2 or 3 days is what it used to take. And then if we were going to go to a planet like Mars, it would certainly be a longer ride in a rocket ship. Good question. And one last question with Natalia and Sasha's group.
Question from the couch there.
Nice and loud, my friend, so we can hear you.
Natalia, can you repeat her question? Because I think because they're on the outside, we can't hear so well on the microphone.
Let's type it in.
Just tell me, my friend.
Shall we come back to you?
She knows, she's just explaining it to her mom.
Okay, how about we come back to you and we will ask Anastasia her question, and then when you figure out how to word your question, then we'll come back to you. Sound good? Okay, Anastasia, what's your question, kiddo? You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Can it take a comet less than 80 years for you to see it twice? Is there a comet that takes less time?
Ooh, I imagine there would be, although I can't name one off the top of my head, but comets take all sorts of different times or different years to come back around.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that, actually. So, because Halley's Comet, you said you can see twice in a lifetime if you happen to be born around the right time, which I did, because I was born in 1985 and it came in 1986, right?
I don't know if I think around there.
Because my name, I always got that all the time. Are you named after Halley's Comet? But no. But I'm wondering, the meteor shower that happens every year, and how does it happen every year? Sorry, I'm not asking my question well. It is pieces that come off a comet, right? Kind of?
Yeah, so is your question kind of like, if the comet takes a really long time to come back, why do we get the Perseid meteor shower every single year?
That's exactly my question, thank you.
And it's because when we have the meteor shower, it's our Earth going through a particular part in its orbit where it has a lot of stuff there. And that stuff gets replenished every time the comet comes around. So it's always the same part of our orbit. It's always around August when our Earth is going through the stuff that the comet left behind. And then when we pass by, while we're on the other side going all the way around, waiting to go back to August, it gets replenished, it gets refilled with more stuff. So then when we come back around the next year in August, we still have the meteor shower.
So we see the meteor shower, but we don't see the comet every year.
Exactly, yeah.
That's a really good explanation, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. So David has a question, but before I get to David's question, Amanda says she has a dog named Oreo and wants to know if astronauts have dogs in space.
Oh, Good
So
question.
I know that we sent a dog to space. Her name was Laika. She is my hero dog because she was a brave Soviet cosmonaut that went up into space. And I think she might be the only dog that has been up there so far, a dogstronaut, let's say.
You're right. I think that's the only animal. So right now, astronauts don't take pets to space with them, but we do some experiments. Like I knew that there were some fish that went to space in an aquarium that was all closed up so we could see how fish swam in space, which is kind of cool too. But I think there definitely should be more animals that get to go to space, especially if we go to Mars. I'd like to see a dog walking on Mars.
That would be pretty cool. Do you think it would be fun to see Piper walking around on Mars? Our dog, Piper. Would it be cool to have dogs in space? Uh-huh. All right. David, do you remember your question? What's your question, bud? You unmute? Bethany, can you? There you go.
Hi, David.
What's the difference of a comet and a meteor?
Ooh, good question.
So a meteor is kind of like a really small space rock, whereas a comet has a lot of ice and gases and dust, and that's why we see the tail. So with the Perseid meteor shower, and the Perseid meteor that I showed you from the ISS, that's leftover stuff from a comet. So not the comet itself, but kind of like the trail of breadcrumbs that it leaves as it passes by.
It's kind of like when you have a lot of snow in your yard and it has a lot of rock and dust and stuff left in it from the snowplow going by. And then in the spring when the snow melts, there's still all that rock left on your lawn. Cool.
Awesome. So it looks like, I can't remember if you're Anna or Molly over there on the end, but what's your question? You're going to need to move closer to the middle of the couch to ask your question because your microphone doesn't pick it up on this side.
How do we catch a meteor?
Oh, good question. How do we catch a meteor?
Oh, well, so if a meteor is big enough, like a big enough rock, and it survives the treacherous journey through our atmosphere, then we can find meteorites when they land on the Earth's surface. And we have two different categories for that. We have falls and finds. So I think fall is the one where you actually see the meteor coming through our atmosphere and you watch it go onto the ground and then you go and pick it up. But then there's also meteors that we just missed seeing it go through our atmosphere, and so we find them a little bit later on.
That's
It
really
has to be
cool.
big enough, yeah.
And you know, some of the best places to find them, I hear, is on the continent called Antarctica. Have you heard of that before? Antarctica is where there's lots of snow and ice, and it's really easy on snow and ice to see something that is black rock, so you can spot them from a long ways away. A little bit trickier if you're kind of like in Stanley Park.
That's fair. So, boys and girls, does anyone else have another question that you haven't, can you move to the side, that you haven't had a chance to ask before we wrap up our time right now with Trish and Rachel? Anyone else have a question that I haven't seen your hand? I'm scrolling through to see if I see you. Lacey and Declan, do you have a question? No questions this time? No. All right. Well, so do you have a question? No. So the next time we're going to meet, we're going to talk more about the meteor shower. And that's going to be, I believe, on the 13th of August, which is actually the peak of the meteor shower. After August 13th, will we still be able to see the meteors?
Yeah, so it goes anywhere from, I believe, mid-July, so July 17th, to the end of August, I think it's around August 24th, we'll still be able to see it, but you really want to go around the peak because that's when you're going to see the most amount of meteors going across our sky.
Awesome. So on August 13th, it's a Thursday at 10 a.m., we will be back here and chatting about the meteor shower. And then maybe you can beg your parents to stay up late that night or wake you up when it's dark out, and you can see the meteors and see what we've been talking about. But boys and girls, before that date, in the next month, or I guess it's really only 3 weeks until then, in the next 3 weeks, I want to see how many of you can make up a constellation story of your own. Okay, go. See how many of you can look up at the stars and make up a constellation story just like Trish recommended.
Cool.
Yeah, so do you have any other suggestions of what we should be looking at in the night sky over the next little while before we go, or just summarize and wrap up and tell us what we can?
I think summertime is a great time to be with your parents outside in the park. And even though it's daytime, Rachel and I have been looking for the moon in the daytime. So even if you can't stay up really late to see the stars and the planets, open your eyes and see if you can see the moon. And does the moon change shapes as the days go on? Is it a full moon? Is it a quarter moon? Does it look like a cat or a cookie? So I think summer is a great time, Haley, to make lots of observations and questions. So hopefully we'll get some clear skies and some clear sunny days where you can check it out and come back with your wonders in August when we meet again.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you so much for joining us, Trish and Rachel. Can everyone give them a wave and say thank you for joining us? And we will see you two again in August. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Super excited. Bye.
Bye, Trish. Bye, Rachel.
Thank you.
All right, everyone else, I'm so glad that you have